Hi guys, Olive here. Here today with my winter book haul. Over the past few months, I have done the typical book lover thing and acquired way too many books, way more than I need. But I've been going to a lot of different library book sales. We have so many of them here in Pittsburgh during the fall season. And then also I've found myself in, a couple of bookstores, some new and some used, some here in Pittsburgh and others in cities that I visited. So I have found myself with a nice stack of books. And as I have been doing over the past few years, when I bring new books home, or used books, new to me books, I like to look at each book and think about what season would fit that book the best, at least in my mind. And then once that season arrives, I like to show off all of those books in my seasonal book haul. So in today's video, I'm going to show you the books that I've picked up that I think suit winter very nicely. Let's start off with fiction, since there's a lot less of it than nonfiction in this haul. Not all that surprising, considering I'm very famously a lover of nonfiction. But it was actually Jill from the Booktube channel The Book Bully who convinced me to pick up this first one. She thought I would like it, and I trust her judgment. It is called Zuleika by Güzel Yakina. The main character of this book is a Tatar woman. Her husband is executed by communist soldiers, after which she is sent to a labor camp in Siberia, where she has to figure out how to survive and how to build an entire life for herself. I think Jill is right. This sounds like exactly my kind of thing. This next one, I saw a used copy available online and I read the synopsis and I was just way too curious not to buy it. It was reasonably priced, so I went for it. It's called The Colony by Gillian Wise. This book stars a woman who has a state-of-the-art prosthetic leg, and she goes to live at this colony where scientists study and attempt to modify people's genes in the name of stem cell research. This is technically science fiction, so I'm not quite sure why I felt pulled to this one, because science fiction normally isn't my thing, but I just cannot wait to see what this is like. But this next novel that I got, I know exactly what about it appealed to me. It is called The Valley of Decision by Marcia Davenport. This book is interesting to me because it is set here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And in this book, we follow 4 generations of a family that owns and operates an iron and steel works. But the final work of fiction in this book haul, yes, that is in fact all the more fiction I have picked up recently. I've been way more focused on acquiring nonfiction. But this little novella, I saw a used copy of this when I was in Chicago over the summer, and I wanted to pick it up because not long before that, I had read a ton about this author in order to make a whole video about it. So I picked up Night Flight by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. This is based on his own personal experiences, which I read all about as I read about this author over the summer, but it's about pilots delivering mail through all different weather conditions at all different times of day. And since I learned so much about him over the summer, it definitely made me interested in picking up his other books. And this is so short. I feel like I could just sit down and read this in an afternoon. But speaking of writers, the first nonfiction book that I picked up that I wanted to show you is called The Trip to Echo Spring: On Writers and Drinking by Olivia Lang. And in this book, the author examines how alcohol affected the lives and the creative output of 6 different American writers. But since we're on the topic of alcohol, I also picked up a copy of In Vino Duplicitus: The Rise and Fall of a Wine Forger Extraordinaire by Peter Hellman, which tells the story of how a 20-something-year-old Indonesian man fooled the entire wine collecting world with his very sophisticated fakes. I watched a whole documentary on this topic called Sour Grapes, which I loved, and I am hoping that this book has even more juicy details. But I also finally got my hands on a copy of one of my most anticipated releases of last year. It's called Shelf Life: Chronicles of a Cairo Bookseller by Nadia Wassef. This is the story of how the Cairo independent bookstore Diwan became a very unlikely success. I love books about books or books about bookstores, so I cannot wait to read this. These next couple of books I found at library book sales. This one is called Bohemians, Bootleggers, Flappers, and Swells. And this is a collection of essays by great writers that were written for the first iteration of Vanity Fair magazine between 1914 and 1936. And Shocked: My Mother, Schiaparelli, and Me by Patricia Volk, which is a memoir in which the author discusses her own very very polished mother, and the haute couture fashion designer Elsa Schiaparelli. And these two women are connected in the author's mind because they both had a very profound influence on her own life. This sounded so unique. It looks so unique. It's beautiful, and the hardcover has this really cool texture to it. I had never even heard of this one before, so I knew it was coming home with me. But going backward a little bit from a book about fashion, I also picked up a book about sewing. It's called Threads of Life, A History of the World Through the Eye of a Needle by Claire Hunter. And this book tells the stories of people from all over the world who use sewing as an expression of identity, of protest, of memory, and of power. But along those same lines, I also got The Subversive Stitch, Embroidery and the Making of the Feminine by Rosika Parker. And this book traces the link between women and embroidery in the UK since the Middle Ages. This cover is so perfect for this book. I just had to have it. Earlier this year at the Greater Pittsburgh Festival of Books, I was able to get my hands on a signed copy of The Inventor of Miracles, Language, Power, and Alexander Graham Bell's Quest to End Deafness by Katie Booth, which is all about the inventor of the telephone's little-known war against the deaf community that still has a negative impact on the deaf community today. This was something that I had never even heard of before, so it was downright shocking to hear the author talk about it during the festival. I've wanted to read this book ever since. Next up, I have a handful of nonfiction books that all have something to do with the winter weather, winter-related topics. The first one is called The Children's Blizzard by David Laskin. And in this book, the author discusses a devastating blizzard that happened in America's heartland in 1888. But on the opposite end of the winter weather spectrum, I also picked up a copy of Winterlust, Finding Beauty in the Fiercest Season by Bernd Brunner, which draws on art, literature, science, and history to discuss how humans have made it through and even celebrated the winter season. This next one I have to show you is a very wintry memoir that I read about in a different wintry memoir that I read last year. It's called The Stars, the Snow, the Fire, 25 Years in the Alaskan Wilderness by John Haynes. And in this memoir, the author recounts his experiences from over 20 years of living as a homesteader on the Alaskan tundra. This next book is one that sits at the intersection of winter and culture. It's called The History of the Snowman by Bob Eckstein. And in this book, the author attempts to look into the past of this wintertime icon, which ends up being a journey that takes him back through the centuries and across cultures. This one just seemed like a lot of fun. But the next book I'm going to show you also deals with what can be a very iconic wintertime tradition for some people, rereading A Christmas Carol. The book is called The Man Who Invented Christmas, How Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol Rescued His Career and Revived Our Holiday Spirits by Les Standiford. In this book, the author tells the story of how this short book that Charles Dickens wrote in order to get creditors off his back turned into an absolute sensation and actually revitalized Victorian interest in the holiday of Christmas. This one sounds like a must-read for fans of A Christmas Carol. The next book I have to show you deals with a Christmas-associated animal. It is titled Reindeer, An Arctic Life by Tilly Smith. This is a natural history of the Arctic mammals, written by a self-professed reindeer geek. I can't even tell you how happy it makes me knowing that there are reindeer geeks out there in the world. But that now allows me to slide very smoothly into the topic of books on animals. I love books on animals. I buy so many of them, and I chose to talk about all the books about animals that can tolerate winter temperatures, very cold temperatures, since this is my winter book haul. And one of those is Penguins of the World by Wayne Lynch, which is chock full of beautiful pictures and lots of information on these fascinating creatures. They are so beautiful. I love them so much. I am sure this is going to be a treat. I also picked up a copy of a newer nature nonfiction book called Down from the Mountain, The Life and Death of a Grizzly Bear by Bryce Andrews. This book tells the story of one specific grizzly bear named Millie. It talks about her life, her cubs, and her death, and what her entire story reveals about the changing nature of the American West. But I also got 2 books on wolves. American Wolf, A True Story of Survival and Obsession in the West by Nate Blakesley, which, similar to the Grizzly Bear book, tells the story of one specific wolf. She was an alpha female who lived in Yellowstone National Park. And Of Wolves and Men by Barry Lopez, in which the author discusses the uneasy interaction interaction between wolves and human civilization over the centuries. The next book that I got that deals with both science and nature is called Discovering the Mammoth, a tale of giants, unicorns, ivory, and the birth of a new science by John J. McKay. This book is all about how people of previous centuries attempted to figure out what they were looking at when looking at the remains of a mammoth, because no one at the time knew what a mammoth was. The author talks about the story of how that particular mystery was solved and how the solving of that mystery more or less established the science of paleontology. Super cool. I got a couple of books on birds as well. Looking for the Goshawk, A Quest in Search of an Elusive Bird of Prey by Connor Mark Jameson is all about the author's mission to see a goshawk in the wild and to discover why exactly they're so hard to spot in the UK. Ever since falling in love with H's for Hawk, I will read anything that has to do with the goshawk, and I just adored this very wintry cover. But I also got Owl Sense by Miriam Darlington, which is one of those natural history meets memoir styles of books that have been very popular recently. So this is a book about owls, but I am sure it's going to be just as much about the author's travels around Europe, trying to see as many different species of owls as she could. I have previously on this channel read and reviewed 2 different books on owls, made a whole video about it, which I will link for you in case you missed it, but I know there's more to know about owls, so I can't wait to read this. But another book with a barn owl on the cover is actually one that I got as a gift from the lovely Gloria Thompson. She sent me a copy of The Lost Spells by Robert Macfarlane and Jackie Morris, which is a gorgeous collection of nature illustrations and nature poetry. Thank you again so much for this, Gloria. I am so delighted to have this as part of my collection. And if any of you watching aren't yet subscribed to Gloria, you definitely should be. You are missing out on some great content if you aren't. And the final nature book in this haul is Much Ado About Mothing, A Year Intoxicated by Britain's Rare and Remarkable Moths by James Lowen. This is another one of those natural history memoir combos in which the author talks about how he fell in love with the study of moths and what he understands about them just through his own observations. I know that moths are a lot less loved than butterflies. They often get the short end of the stick, but I personally think they're magnificent. So I knew I had to have this book the moment I saw it. Another memoir, I got my own copy of Phosphorescence, a memoir of finding joy when your world goes dark by Julia Baird. This is a collection of stories and lessons from the author's life, and it's also one of the books that we read from during Nonfiction November in my circle over on Threadable. Those sections are still up on the Threadable app, so I will leave the link in the description box below in case you haven't yet joined my circle. I loved the sections that we read from during Nonfiction November, so I decided I needed to read the rest of this book. And another memoir, I got The Reactor, a book about grief and repair by Nick Blackburn. All I know about this book is that the author discusses the loss of his father, and I know that Helen MacDonald raved about it. And that's really all I needed to know. And then here at the end of this book haul, I have a handful of absolutely fascinating sounding sports books to show you. The first one is called The Punch, One Night, Two Lives, and the Fight That Changed Basketball Forever by John Feinstein. This book is all about one punch that was thrown at a 1977 Rockets-Lakers game and how that fight went on to have long-term impacts on the health and careers of the 2 people who were involved. This was before my time, so I'm going to be going into this completely blind. I also got Collision of Wills by Jack Gilden, which is all about the relationship between the Baltimore Colts coach and the team's star quarterback in the 1960s. I really loved Jack Gilden's latest book, which I reviewed for the Christian Science Monitor. I loved it so much that I tracked down a used copy of his first book. I also think he watches the channel sometimes, so hi Jack, if you're watching. I would ask you to sign my book, but it's already signed. I also got a book about boxing called Cinderella Man by Jeremy Schaap. This is all about an underdog boxer and the challenging times in which he lived. I have heard that this is extremely well written, so I cannot wait to read it. And here at the very end of this book haul, I have 2 collections of sports stories written by amazing sports writers to show you. The first one is called The Cost of These Dreams, Sports Stories and Other Serious Business by Wright Thompson. And I got bought everything they had, sports writing from David Halberstam, and I have heard that both of these collections are fantastic. So those are all the books that I had to show you in this winter book haul. If you have thoughts on any of these books, if you've read them and you want to share your opinions, or if you now want to read them after seeing them in this video, I'd love to hear any or all of that down in the comment section below. All the books that I mentioned today, any other links that I may have promised you, that'll all be in the description box below. If you're on a mobile device, just tap the title of this video and that will expand for you. And at the bottom of that exact same description box, you'll see links to everywhere you can find me around the internets, like Goodreads and Instagram, the two places where I'm the most active, in case you would like to keep up with what I am reading and writing about right now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.